The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Elena Reyes's home office. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she analyzed the latest satellite images. At 56, the retired Air Force colonel still maintained the discipline that had defined her 30-year military career. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Something on the screen caught her attention. She leaned forward, squinting at a cluster of vessels moving in an unusual pattern off the eastern seaboard. "That's the third time this week," she muttered, taking a sip of her now cold coffee. Elena wasn't supposed to have access to these images, but she'd maintained connections with former colleagues who shared her passion for national security, and occasionally shared things they shouldn't. The past few weeks, she'd noticed something troubling. A group of cargo ships following routes that made no commercial sense, stopping at ports with no apparent purpose. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Jack? It's Elena. I need you to check something for me." Jack Chen had been her intelligence officer during her last command. Now retired like her, he occasionally helped with her projects. "Don't tell me you're still obsessing over those ships," he said with a sigh. "Just humor me. Can you get me the manifests for vessels entering Boston Harbor last Tuesday? Particularly the Starlight Venture." "Elena, I'm having dinner with my grandkids tonight. Can't this wait?" She glanced back at her screen. "I don't think it can." 3 hours later, Elena's dining room table was covered with printouts, shipping manifests, crew lists, port authority logs, and satellite images. Jack had come through as he always did, and what she was seeing confirmed her worst fears. "Electronic components," she said, pointing to a line on the manifest. "High-capacity batteries, signal generators. None of this makes sense for a vessel claiming to transport agricultural equipment." Jack leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You know how international shipping works. Companies split loads, share space. There could be simple explanations. And this?" Elena pulled up a digital image on her tablet. "That's the Starlight Venture docked in Singapore 2 months ago. And here's the same ship last week." She swiped to a new image. "Notice anything?" Jack took the tablet, studying both photos. "They've modified the deck. Added some kind of structure midship." "Exactly. And it's not on any of the declared modifications. I've checked." "What are you thinking?" Elena took a deep breath. "I think we're looking at the pieces of an EMP device. A big one. Someone's assembling the components across multiple ships to avoid detection, but they're bringing it all together for something." Jack's face grew serious. "That's a major accusation, Elena." "I know." She spread out a map of the eastern seaboard. "Look at these movements. They're converging here, about 50 miles off the coast of Virginia, close enough to hit Norfolk Naval Base, the Pentagon, and D.C. If, and that's a big if, this is some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon, what's the delivery system? These cargo ships are slow, obvious targets." Elena nodded. "That's what I couldn't figure out. Until I saw this." She pulled up another image. "This is from yesterday. Small boats transferring something to this fishing vessel. I think the weapon's being moved to a more maneuverable platform." Jack sat down heavily. "We need to take this to someone. Homeland Security, FBI, someone. Already tried." Elena's voice had an edge to it. "I called Ben Torres at Naval Intelligence last week when I first noticed the patterns. He said my concerns were noted, but that I was probably seeing normal shipping activity." "Torres is an idiot," Jack muttered. "Maybe, but he's an idiot with clearance and authority." She gathered the papers into a folder. "I'm going to try again with everything I've collected. I need to get to D.C. 2 days later, Elena sat in a sterile conference room at the Pentagon. Across from her sat 3 men and a woman in various uniforms and suits. Admiral Carson, the head of Naval Intelligence. General Phillips from Homeland Security. Deputy Director Foster from the FBI, and Dr. Hall, some tech specialist they'd brought in. "Colonel Reyes," Admiral Carson began, "we appreciate you bringing this to our attention." "It's just Ms. Reyes now, sir," she corrected. "I've been retired for 5 years." "Of course," he nodded politely. "We've reviewed the materials you sent ahead." Elena pushed forward a thumb drive. "I've compiled more evidence since then. Satellite imagery shows these vessels have now converged at these coordinates." She opened her laptop to display a map. "And I've developed a plan to confirm what they're doing." "Which is?" Dr. Hall asked, speaking for the first time. "I believe they're assembling an electromagnetic pulse weapon capable of disabling electronics across a major portion of the eastern seaboard. The damage could affect military installations, hospitals, power grids. The impact would be catastrophic. General Phillips leaned forward. Based on shipping manifests and satellite images? That's quite a leap, not just that. Look at these intercepted communications. She played an audio file. This conversation, translated from Russian, specifically mentions the pulse generator testing positive. And here, she pointed to a document. Equipment purchases from 3 separate companies known to provide components for electromagnetic research. The room was quiet for a moment. I've put together a reconnaissance plan, Elena continued, pulling out another folder. A low-altitude flyover with specialized equipment could detect the electromagnetic signatures that would confirm what they're building. I've identified the aircraft we'd need, the sensors required. Ms. Reyes, the Admiral interrupted. I think we need to step back. Dr. Hall was studying one of Elena's printouts. These readings could indicate any number of things. Standard radio equipment, radar systems, ships use all sorts of electronic gear. Not in this configuration, Elena insisted. Not with these power requirements. Deputy Director Foster sighed. The FBI has monitored threats to critical infrastructure for years. Our assessment protocols would have flagged something of this magnitude, unless it was deliberately designed to stay below your thresholds, Elena countered. Look at how they've spread the components across multiple vessels, made purchases through shell companies, used coded language. And your solution is to fly directly over international waters near these suspicious vessels? General Phillips raised an eyebrow. What if you're right? You'd be putting the aircraft and crew at risk of having their systems disabled. That's why my plan uses older aircraft with minimal electronic components, properly shielded instrumentation. Admiral Carson held up his hand. Ms. Reyes, we appreciate your concern and your thoroughness. Your service record is impeccable, and your expertise in aerial reconnaissance is well documented. He closed the folder in front of him. But we need more concrete evidence before committing resources to an operation like this. Sir, with all due respect, by the time you have concrete evidence, it might be too late. We'll increase satellite surveillance of the area, Dr. Hall offered. Monitor for unusual electronic signatures. And we'll put a team on checking these companies and individuals you've flagged, added Deputy Director Foster. Elena could feel the dismissal coming. She'd seen it before. The polite nods, the promises to look into it, the subtle glances between officials that said, another retiree who can't let go. Thank you for your time, she said, gathering her materials. I hope I'm wrong. Outside the Pentagon, Elena stood in the parking lot, the spring breeze carrying the scent of cherry blossoms. Her phone buzzed. Jack checking in. They didn't buy it, she said simply. Bureaucrats, Jack grumbled. What now? Elena looked up at the clear blue sky, watching a commercial airliner trace its path overhead. I still have my plane, she said quietly. Elena. No, whatever you're thinking, it's just a thought, she replied, but they both knew it wasn't. I'll call you later. She hung up and got into her car. As she drove away from the Pentagon, her mind was already racing through calculations, fuel capacity, range, the modifications she'd need to make to her old P-51 Mustang. The vintage aircraft wasn't just her retirement hobby. It might be the perfect tool for what came next. Because Elena Reyes hadn't spent 30 years protecting her country to stop now, especially when she knew something terrible was coming. And if no one would listen, she would have to act alone. Elena's coastal home sat on a small bluff overlooking the Atlantic. The 2-bedroom cottage wasn't much, but it had the perfect spot for what she needed. A converted garage that now housed her monitoring equipment and a small office. As the sun rose the morning after her Pentagon meeting, she was already at her desk, eyes red from lack of sleep. Coffee? Jack stood in the doorway holding 2 steaming mugs. He'd driven down from D.C. last night, concerned about what Elena might do next. Thanks. She took the mug without looking away from her screens. Something's happening, Jack. 3 of the vessels changed course overnight. Jack set his coffee down and leaned over her shoulder. Where are they heading? That's what's interesting. They're moving closer to shore but still staying in international waters. She pointed to a map with several blinking dots. About 30 miles off Virginia Beach now. Still could be nothing, Jack said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena pulled up another screen. I've been monitoring radio frequencies. Listen to this. She pressed play on a recording. A man's voice, heavily accented. Test phase complete. All units prepare for delivery protocol. Countdown begins at 800 tomorrow. Could be anything, Jack said, but he was frowning now. It's the same voice from the Russian transmission I played at the Pentagon. Elena stood up and stretched her stiff back. And there's more. She walked to a corkboard on the wall covered with printouts and photos. I've been tracking electrical disturbances along the coast. 3 power substations reported unexplained surges in the past week. 2 Navy vessels had communication systems fail temporarily while on patrol in this exact area. She tapped the map. They blamed it on equipment malfunction. You think they're testing the weapon? Small-scale tests, yes. Getting the calibration right. Elena took a sip of her coffee. An EMP isn't just an on-off switch. To be effective without being detected ahead of time, they'd need to test it in controlled bursts. Jack ran a hand through his thinning hair. We should try reaching out again. Maybe Torres won't help, Elena cut him off. But I might know someone who will. An hour later, Elena was on a video call with Diane Winters, a former squadron mate who now worked for Homeland Security. On the screen, Diane looked skeptical as Elena laid out her evidence. You're asking a lot, Elena, Diane said when she finished, going around official channels questioning decisions already made by people above my pay grade. I'm asking you to look at the evidence with fresh eyes, Elena replied. That's all, Diane sighed. Send me what you have. I'll review it. But no promises. After the call ended, Jack looked hopeful. Diane's smart. If anyone will see the pattern, she will. Maybe. Elena wasn't convinced. But we're running out of time. She pulled up a chair to her workbench where pieces of electronic equipment were scattered about. Meanwhile, I'm preparing for the possibility that no one believes me until it's too late. What are you building? Jack asked. Shielded camera system for my plane. Old school film backup too, in case the digital gets fried. She picked up what looked like a modified radio. And this will detect electromagnetic pulses, even small ones. Jack watched her work for a few moments. You're really planning to fly out there yourself, aren't you? Elena didn't look up. Someone has to get concrete proof. It's too dangerous, Jack protested. Even if you're right about the EMP, those ships could be armed. They could shoot you down. My Mustang can handle herself. She's small, fast, and I've kept her engines in top condition. Elena smiled for the first time that day. Besides, they won't be expecting a World War II fighter plane to be their biggest problem. Jack knew that stubborn look. He'd seen it during desert operations when Elena had insisted on flying a reconnaissance mission. Others thought too risky. She'd come back with the exact intelligence they needed. At least wait to hear from Diane, he said. Elena nodded, but they both knew her mind was made up. That evening, they drove to the small private airfield where Elena kept her plane. The P-51 Mustang gleamed under the hangar lights, its silver body polished to perfection. She'd named it Second Chance after buying it 10 years ago as a retirement project. Beautiful, isn't she? Elena ran her hand along the aircraft's nose. They don't make them like this anymore. Because modern planes have, computers and safety features, Jack replied dryly. Elena laughed. That's exactly why she's perfect for this mission. No computer systems to fry. She opened the cockpit and began installing her homemade equipment. I've reinforced the shielding on the essential instruments, but most of this plane is mechanical. The EMP would barely affect it. Jack watched her work with the efficiency that had made her one of the Air Force's top pilots. You really think tomorrow is the day? That countdown message was pretty clear. And look at this. She showed him her phone displaying a weather report. Major storm system moving up the coast tomorrow. Perfect cover for an attack that might cause power outages and communication failures. As they drove back to Elena's house, her phone rang. It was Diane. I've reviewed everything, Diane said, her voice tight. I brought it to my director. And? Elena held her breath. He said the evidence is circumstantial, not enough to justify mobilizing resources, especially after the Pentagon already dismissed it. Diane paused. But Elena, off the record? I'm worried you might be right. That's something, at least. The most I could get is increased satellite monitoring of the area, and I put a notification into the system about potential electronic disturbances along the coast. Diane sounded frustrated. My hands are tied beyond that. I understand. Thanks for trying. Elena hung up and looked at Jack. Well, that's that. You're not surprised, Jack noted. Not really. Bureaucracy moves slow even when facing disaster. She pulled into her driveway and shut off the engine. "I'll be airborne at dawn." They spent the night finalizing preparations. Elena reviewed coastal maps, plotting a course that would keep her below radar until the last possible moment. Jack helped her prepare the specialized camera mounts and recording equipment. Around midnight, Elena's monitoring equipment picked up something new. "Power fluctuations," she said, pointing to a live feed from a weather station near Virginia Beach. "And look, 3 cell towers just went offline briefly along the coast." "Testing again?" Jack asked. "Bigger test this time. They're getting ready." Elena pulled up more data, and the ships have moved again. They're forming a perimeter now, about 25 miles off the coast. Classic defensive formation. Jack studied the pattern. "That center ship, the fishing vessel you identified before? That's where the weapon is," Elena confirmed. "I'm sure of it." At 4 a.m. they drove back to the airfield in silence. The night was clear, stars visible above, but weather radar showed the storm system approaching from the south just as predicted. Elena changed into her old flight suit, which still fit well enough. As she did the pre-flight check on her Mustang, Jack stood by with a flashlight. "The recording equipment is set to start automatically once you're airborne," he reminded her. "The camera can run for 2 hours before the memory card is full." Elena nodded. "I'll stay low, approach from the southeast to avoid their likely radar coverage, then make a single pass directly over the central vessel." She checked her watch. "If their countdown begins at 0800, I want to be in position by 7:30. "And if they spot you?" Jack asked. "I make a lot of noise, take as many pictures as I can, and get out fast." She smiled grimly. This old girl can still outrun most things on a good day. Jack handed her the helmet. "This is crazy, you know that?" "Yep." Elena put on the helmet and adjusted it. "But sometimes crazy is all we've got left." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as she climbed into the cockpit. The familiar smell of leather and metal brought back memories of thousands of flight hours. "Get clear evidence," Jack said through the intercom. "Then get back here in one piece. If you find something concrete, I'll make sure it gets to the right people." "Roger that," Elena replied, falling easily into pilot speak. She ran through the final checks, then looked at Jack. "If I'm not back by noon, you will be." He cut her off. "Just fly safe." Elena nodded and started the engine. The powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin roared to life, the propeller becoming a blur as it spun up to speed. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the Atlantic, she taxied to the runway, got clearance from the small control tower, and pushed the throttle forward. Second Chance accelerated down the runway and lifted into the dawn sky, banking east toward the ocean and whatever waited beyond the horizon. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and focus that came with flying. After all the frustration of the past weeks, the dismissals, the doubts, the bureaucratic roadblocks, she was finally doing something. Whether she was flying toward proof or disaster remained to be seen. The roar of the Mustang's engine filled Elena's ears as she flew eastward over the Atlantic. The sun had just cleared the horizon, casting long golden rays across the water below. She kept her altitude low, barely 300 feet above the waves, to avoid radar detection for as long as possible. Still nothing on radio chatter, she murmured to herself, monitoring the frequencies she'd identified earlier. The ocean stretched before her, empty and vast in the morning light. She checked her instruments. Everything was working perfectly. Her modified radar, the shielded camera system, the electromagnetic pulse detector she'd rigged up. The old plane handled beautifully, responding to her lightest touch on the controls. Flying had always felt like coming home to Elena, even after all these years. 30 minutes into the flight, the first blip appeared on her radar. A vessel, just where she'd expected it to be. The outermost ship in the formation she'd been tracking. Elena banked slightly to the south, plotting a course that would keep her away from this lookout until the last possible moment. "Let's see what you're up to," she whispered, adjusting her heading. According to her calculations, she had about 15 minutes before reaching the main target. The fishing vessel she believed carried the EMP weapon. Back on land, Jack paced Elena's small office, watching the tracking system she'd set up. A small dot represented her plane's position, moving steadily eastward. On another screen, satellite imagery showed the cluster of ships forming what looked unmistakably like a defensive perimeter. His phone rang. It was Diane. "Any news?" he asked immediately. "Nothing official. she replied, her voice tight with frustration. "But I've been making calls." 2 more electrical substations reported brief outages this morning, and the Navy lost contact with a patrol boat for 7 minutes. "They're blaming it on equipment failure again." "They're ramping up the tests," Jack said. Elena was right. "Where is she now?" Diane asked. Jack hesitated, then decided Diane needed to know. "She's airborne, headed toward the ships in her old Mustang." "She's what?" Diane's voice rose. "Jack, you should have stopped her." "Have you ever tried stopping Elena when her mind's made up?" Jack replied. "Besides, we needed proof and no one else was going to get it." A long silence, then Diane spoke again. "I've got a friend at Norfolk Naval Air Station. Let me make a call, maybe we can get some backup headed her way." "Hurry," Jack urged, watching Elena's dot move closer to the ships. 10 miles from her target, Elena spotted the first 2 ships on the perimeter. Large cargo vessels positioned precisely as she'd seen in the satellite images. She dipped even lower, skimming just above the whitecaps. The Mustang's reflection danced across the water beneath her. Her pulse detector began to register readings. Faint, but definitely there. Electromagnetic pulses, much stronger than any natural background radiation. Her heart beat faster. This was it. The evidence she needed. "Activating cameras," she said aloud, flipping the switch that started the recording equipment. Through her headset came the confirming beep that both the digital and backup film cameras were operational. 5 miles out, everything changed. A burst of radio chatter erupted in her headphones. Urgent voices in Russian and accented English. Unidentified aircraft approaching from southwest. "How did they find us?" "Initiate defensive protocols." They'd spotted her. Elena pushed the throttle forward, the Mustang's engine roaring as she accelerated. "No point in stealth now, speed was her ally. Let's see what you've got," she muttered. Heading directly for the center ship, at Elena's house, Jack watched with growing alarm as multiple signals began broadcasting from the ships. "They've seen her," he said to Diane, who was still on the phone. "My contact says they can have aircraft in the air in 15 minutes, Diane replied. "But that's too long." "Wait," Jack interrupted, leaning closer to the monitor. "Something's happening." The electromagnetic readings from the area had just spiked dramatically. Elena saw it before she felt it. A visible distortion in the air above the central ship. Like heat waves rising from hot pavement, her instruments went wild, needles swinging to maximum readings. The pulse detector blared a warning. "They're powering it up," she realized. "They're actually doing it!" She was 3 miles out now, closing fast. Through her binoculars, she could see frantic activity on the deck of the fishing vessel. Something large had been uncovered. A dish-like apparatus surrounded by equipment that definitely didn't belong on a fishing boat. A sudden crackle, and her radio went dead. The digital camera system flashed an error message. The pulse had taken out her electronics just as she'd feared it might. But the old Mustang continued to fly true, its mechanical heart unbothered by the electromagnetic assault. And the backup film camera, completely mechanical, kept clicking away. "Gotcha," Elena said grimly, aiming directly for the center vessel. She needed better pictures, clearer evidence of what they were deploying. On the ship below, people scattered as her plane roared overhead, just 100 feet above the deck. Elena banked hard, circling back for another pass. She could see it clearly now. The weapon was massive, far larger than she'd anticipated. Men in unmarked uniforms were working frantically around it, adjusting controls. One man looked up, pointing at her plane. Even from this distance, Elena could see the surprise on his face. They hadn't expected anyone to be flying after their pulse, certainly not in a vintage warbird from another era. On her second pass, Elena flew even lower. The mechanical camera clicked steadily, capturing high-resolution images of the weapon and the people operating it. She could see power cables, control stations, the main emitter dish now fully extended upward. Something flashed below. Muzzle flare. They were shooting at her. "Time to go," Elena muttered, banking sharply away. She'd gotten what she came for. Now she needed to get this evidence back to land. As she turned westward, a much larger pulse erupted from the ship. This one was visible, a rippling wave of energy spreading outward. It washed over her plane, and for a heart-stopping moment, the engine coughed. But the Mustang's mechanical resilience held, and the engine roared back to life. Looking back, Elena saw the pulse expanding toward the coast. This wasn't a test, this was the attack. "No," she whispered, horror washing over her. She'd been right all along, but she hadn't acted soon enough. The weapon was already firing. She grabbed her backup radio, an old-style unit she'd kept shielded until now, and broadcast on emergency frequencies. Mayday, Mayday. This is civilian pilot Elena Reyes. Electromagnetic pulse weapon firing from coordinates 36 degrees, 43 minutes north, 74 degrees, 12 minutes east. Major EMP attack underway. Repeat, major EMP attack underway. Only static answered her. Either no one was listening or her signal wasn't getting through. Elena made a split-second decision. She banked the Mustang around again, facing the fishing vessel one more time. The weapon was fully operational now, pulses firing at regular intervals toward the coast. Each blast was followed by a brief cooling period. She could see the pattern. One chance, she murmured, checking her fuel gauge. Still half full. Enough for what she needed to do. She lined up her approach, diving toward the ship. Men scattered on the deck below, some raising weapons to fire at her again. But Elena wasn't aiming for a strafing run. She had something else in mind. The Mustang screamed toward the vessel, engines at full power. Elena timed her approach perfectly, waiting for the moment just after a pulse fired, when the weapon would be in its brief cooling cycle. At the last possible second, she pulled up sharply, roaring just over the weapon itself. The Mustang's propeller wash and engine exhaust blasted directly down onto the sensitive equipment. She banked hard, circling back immediately for another pass. On her second flyby, she came in even lower. Someone on deck was frantically trying to cover the exposed circuitry of the weapon. Elena could see cables disconnecting from the turbulence of her passes. "That's right," she said through gritted teeth. "Let's see how your fancy weapon handles a little old-fashioned disruption." On her third pass, she saw what she was looking for, smoke rising from one of the control panels. The weapon's cooling system was failing under the stress of her repeated flybys. A spray of bullets pinged off her wing. Elena pulled up, assessing the damage. Nothing critical hit. The old plane was tough, built to withstand much worse in actual combat. Below, the weapon fired again, but this time the pulse was visibly weaker, the energy dissipating before it reached any significant distance. The disruption was working. Elena lined up for a fourth pass. This time she reached beside her seat and grabbed a small package she'd prepared, a bundle of mechanical tools wrapped in her old flight jacket. As she roared over the weapon, she released it, watching as it dropped directly onto the main control panel of the EMP device. The impact wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no fireball, but it was enough. Sparks erupted from the weapon's base. The main emitter dish tilted askew, its aiming mechanism damaged. "Try fixing that in a hurry," Elena muttered, banking away. One of the cargo ships on the perimeter was moving now, turning to intercept her escape route. But the Mustang was faster, especially at low altitude. Elena pushed the throttle to maximum and sped westward, back toward the coast. She glanced back one last time. The weapon was clearly disabled, at least temporarily. Smoke poured from its base, and the men on deck were scrambling with fire extinguishers. Her radio crackled suddenly, a voice breaking through the static. "Unidentified aircraft. This is U.S. Navy patrol." "Identify yourself." Elena's heart leapt. Someone had heard her after all. "This is Elena Reyes in a P-51 Mustang," she responded quickly. "I've just disrupted an electromagnetic pulse attack from a vessel at coordinates 36 to 43 north, 24 to 12 east. I have photographic evidence of the weapon and the operating crew." A pause then. "Copy that, Mustang. Be advised. Friendly aircraft are inbound to your location. Maintain current heading and altitude." "Roger," Elena replied, relief washing over her. She checked her fuel gauge again, enough to get home, but not much to spare after her extended engagement with the ship. As the coastline appeared on the horizon, Elena allowed herself a small smile. Against all odds, she'd done it. She'd confirmed the threat, gathered the evidence, and even managed to disrupt the attack. Now she just had to land this old plane safely and make sure the world understood what had almost happened today. And maybe, just maybe, make some people at the Pentagon admit they should have listened to her in the first place. Elena's hands were steady on the controls as the coastline grew larger on the horizon. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through her body, her breathing had slowed to a normal rhythm. She'd been in tight spots before during her military career, but nothing quite like single-handedly disrupting an electromagnetic attack on American soil. Through her headset came another transmission, Payphone, this is Hawk Leader. We have visual on you, approaching from your 6 o'clock. 2 F-18s, do you copy? Elena glanced over her shoulder and spotted 2 Navy fighters pulling alongside her, one on each wing. Their sleek modern frames made her Mustang look like the antique it was. I copy, Hawk Leader. Good to have company. Ma'am, we've been briefed on your situation. We'll escort you to Naval Air Station Oceana. Please maintain current heading and speed. Negative, Elena replied firmly. My plane is registered at Hampton Regional Airfield. That's where my ground team is waiting with the proper equipment to secure the evidence I've collected. A pause on the radio. Elena could imagine the pilot consulting with his superiors. Finally, copy that. P-51, adjust heading to 275. We'll escort you to Hampton. Elena banked slightly, setting course for the small airfield where Jack would be waiting. She glanced at her fuel gauge again. Cutting it close, but she'd make it. Hawk Leader, be advised I'm carrying photographic evidence of the weapon and operating crew. The electromagnetic pulse disabled my digital systems, but I have backup mechanical cameras with film footage intact. Understood. P-51. There will be officials waiting at Hampton to debrief you and secure that evidence. The fighters stayed with her, one slightly ahead now, leading the way. Elena took a moment to assess her plane. The Mustang had taken a few hits. Bullet holes peppered the left wing and part of the fuselage, but nothing had hit anything vital. The old bird had done her proud today. As the Virginia coastline came clearly into view, Elena allowed herself to think about what she'd seen. The weapon had been far more advanced than even she had suspected, capable of targeting specific areas with incredible precision. If she hadn't disrupted it when she did, her radio crackled again. P-51. We're getting reports of electrical disturbances along the coast. Limited outages in Virginia Beach and Norfolk. Sounds like their weapon got off at least one pulse before you interrupted them. Any serious damage? Elena asked, concern tightening her chest. Negative. Mostly small electronics and some communications equipment. Nothing catastrophic. Whatever you did out there, it seems to have worked. Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The pulse that had washed over her plane must have been the primary attack. But her intervention had weakened it significantly. Through breaks in the clouds, she could now see evidence of the weapon's limited effects. Parts of the coastline were dark even in daylight, power clearly out in sections. But it was nothing compared to what could have happened. A complete blackout of the eastern seaboard. Military installations disabled, hospitals without power, air traffic control systems down, Hampton Regional Tower. This is Navy Hawk Leader escorting civilian P-51 tail number November 225 Echo Romeo, requesting priority landing clearance. The small regional airport rarely handled military traffic, and Elena could hear the surprise in the controller's voice as he cleared them for approach. I see the welcoming committee, she murmured as the airfield came into view. Several black SUVs were parked near the runway, along with what appeared to be military and homeland security vehicles. She recognized Jack's old blue pickup among them. The landing was smooth despite her fatigue. As the Mustang rolled to a stop on the tarmac, Elena took a moment to pat the dashboard affectionately. Good job, old girl. We did it. The Navy fighters roared overhead in salute before banking away toward their base. Elena taxied to her usual spot near her hangar, where a crowd had already gathered. She could see Jack pushing his way through the officials, his face a mix of relief and excitement. As she cut the engine and the propeller slowed to a stop, the full weight of what she'd done hit her. She'd defied the Pentagon, flown into international waters alone, confronted an enemy vessel, and disrupted an attack that could have devastated the East Coast. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her helmet. Jack was the first to reach her as she climbed down from the cockpit. Without a word, he pulled her into a tight hug. You're insane, he whispered in her ear. And also the stubbornest, bravest pilot I've ever known. Did you ever doubt me? She asked with a tired smile. Not for a second. He stepped back, suddenly serious. Diane came through. After your Mayday call got picked up, she managed to get the recordings to the right people. Navy and Coast Guard vessels are converging on the coordinates you provided right now. Before Elena could respond, they were surrounded by officials in various uniforms. A tall woman in a Homeland Security windbreaker stepped forward. Colonel Reyes, I'm Director Patterson. We need to debrief you immediately and secure your evidence. Elena nodded toward the plane. The camera systems are behind the seat. The mechanical backup should have clear images of the weapon and operating crew. As technicians carefully removed the cameras, Elena found herself face to face with a familiar figure, Admiral Carson from the Pentagon meeting. "Colonel," he said stiffly, his expression unreadable. "It's still just Ms. Reyes," she reminded him, standing straighter despite her exhaustion, "though I'm thinking of going back to Colonel if this is the reception I get." For a moment, the Admiral maintained his stern demeanor. Then, unexpectedly, he cracked a small smile. "You were right. We were wrong. It's not the first time military intelligence has missed something, and it won't be the last. The important thing is we stopped it," Elena said, softer now. "No, Colonel. You stopped it," he corrected. "While we were still analyzing the situation, you took action." He glanced at her bullet-riddled plane. At considerable personal risk, a young lieutenant approached, holding up one of the film canisters. "Sir, we've got the evidence secured." "Good," the Admiral nodded. "Get it processed immediately." Director Patterson joined them. "We're getting updates from the Coast Guard. They've intercepted 2 of the vessels. The central ship, the one with the weapon, appears to be disabled and adrift. They're approaching with caution." "The weapon is partially destroyed," Elena explained. "I managed to damage the control systems and cooling mechanisms, but the core technology is still there, and we need to understand it." "We will," the Admiral assured her. "Thanks to you, we have that chance." As the officials huddled together, reviewing plans and coordinating the ongoing response, Jack pulled Elena aside. "You should sit down. You look dead on your feet." Elena realized he was right. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was setting in. She allowed Jack to guide her to a folding chair someone had brought out. "There's something else you should know," Jack said quietly, handing her a bottle of water. "Those electrical disturbances along the coast? They affected Norfolk Naval Station and Langley Air Force Base. Just enough to demonstrate what the weapon could do without causing catastrophic damage." Elena nearly choked on her water. They were sending a message. "Exactly. Intelligence is already calling this a warning shot, a demonstration of capability rather than a full attack. Which means there could be other weapons," Elena said, the implication sinking in, most likely. "But now we know what to look for." Jack squeezed her shoulder. "You changed the game today. They can't hide these operations anymore." A young Coast Guard officer approached them, tablet in hand. "Miss Reyes, we've compiled satellite imagery from the last hour. I thought you might want to see this." The tablet showed a real-time view of the area where Elena had encountered the ships. Coast Guard vessels were visible, surrounding the fishing vessel that had housed the weapon. 2 other ships appeared to be attempting to flee the scene, with Navy vessels in pursuit. "They won't get far," the officer said with satisfaction. "We've got air support dropping ahead of them right now." Elena handed the tablet back, a mixture of relief and weariness washing over her. "I need to see the photographs as soon as they're developed," she told Jack. "There were details about that weapon I couldn't process in the moment." "Already arranged," Jack assured her. "Diane's team is setting up a secure room at the Norfolk field office. They want you there for the analysis." Before Elena could respond, Director Patterson returned with Admiral Carson and several other officials she didn't recognize. "Colonel Reyes," Patterson began, using her military title deliberately, "we need your expertise for the next phase of this operation. Your understanding of the technology combined with the evidence you've gathered is invaluable." Admiral Carson nodded. "We're assembling a joint task force. Navy, Air Force, Homeland Security, and intelligence agencies. We'd like you to head the analysis team." Elena looked at them in surprise. That's quite a change from yesterday's dismissal. "Results tend to change minds quickly in our business," the Admiral admitted, "especially when those results involve preventing a potential catastrophe." Elena glanced at Jack, who gave her an encouraging nod, then back to her battered Mustang. The old plane sat proudly on the tarmac, bullet holes and all, a relic from another era that had just made history again. "When do we start?" she asked. "Now," Patterson replied. "The helicopters are waiting to take us to Norfolk. Your friend Mr. Chen is welcome to join the team as well." As they walked toward the waiting helicopters, Elena heard the distinctive sound of more fighter jets passing overhead, reinforcements heading out to sea, toward the coordinates she'd provided. "You know," Jack said quietly, falling into step beside her, "when you left this morning, I was almost certain I'd never see you again." Elena smiled. watching the jets disappear into the eastern sky. I had an advantage they never expected. Your crazy flying skills? No. She looked back at her trusty Mustang one last time. Sometimes the oldest solutions work best against the newest problems. That's a lesson the military keeps having to relearn. As they climbed aboard the helicopter, Elena felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond just being proven right. She had protected her country using nothing more than determination, experience, and an aircraft most would consider a museum piece. The helicopter lifted off, banking toward Norfolk where the real work would begin. The threat had been identified but not eliminated. There would be more ships, more weapons, more challenges ahead, and Elena Reyes would be ready for them. 3 weeks after Elena's flight over the Atlantic, she stood at the head of a conference table in a secure room deep within the Pentagon. Wall screens displayed satellite images, technical diagrams, and photographs, many taken by her vintage camera during that fateful mission. Around the table sat military officers, intelligence analysts, and government officials, all focused on her presentation. The device is what we're calling a targeted electromagnetic pulse weapon, or TEMP, Elena explained, using a laser pointer to highlight components in one of her photographs. Unlike traditional EMP weapons that affect everything in a wide radius, this one can focus its energy on specific areas or even specific types of systems. Admiral Carson leaned forward. Which explains why only certain systems were affected along the coast. Exactly, Elena nodded. They weren't trying to take down the entire eastern seaboard, not yet anyway. They were demonstrating capability, showing that they could target military installations while leaving civilian infrastructure mostly untouched. Director Patterson from Homeland Security tapped her tablet. The interrogations of the captured crew have confirmed your assessment. This was a technology demonstration, meant to be followed by demands. Do we know who's behind it? Asked a silver-haired general Elena hadn't met before. The crew was multinational, Jack replied from his seat beside Elena. He'd been officially brought onto the task force as her deputy, his intelligence background proving invaluable. Russians, Koreans, even a few Americans. They were mercenaries, not state actors, which makes this more concerning, not less, Elena added. State-sponsored terrorism follows predictable patterns. This group doesn't. She advanced to the next slide, showing the damaged weapon itself now secured in a Navy research facility. The technology combines Soviet-era pulse generation with modern targeting systems. Whoever designed this had access to both old-school EMP research and cutting-edge directional energy technology. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a one-off threat. It represented a new kind of danger. Admiral Carson broke the silence. Colonel Reyes, your team has done remarkable work analyzing this threat. What are your recommendations going forward? Elena still wasn't used to being called Colonel again. After her successful mission, the Air Force had quietly reinstated her retired status to active reserve, complete with security clearances and a consultant's salary. We need 3 things, she answered confidently. First, a detection network specifically calibrated for electromagnetic signatures like the ones I recorded. Second, hardened shielding for critical infrastructure that can't be easily replaced or protected otherwise. And third, she paused, knowing this would be the hard sell, a rapid response force equipped with aircraft similar to my Mustang. Predictably, eyebrows raised around the table. You want us to invest in World War II era planes? The general didn't bother hiding his skepticism. Not exactly, Elena clarified. I want a small force of aircraft with minimal electronic systems. They don't have to be vintage planes, they could be modern aircraft specially designed to operate with mechanical backups for all critical systems. Jack stepped in smoothly. Think of it as an insurance policy. If these weapons become more common, and our intelligence suggests they will, we need assets that can function in an environment where modern electronic systems are compromised. To Elena's surprise, Admiral Carson was nodding. It makes sense. A squadron of hardened aircraft, specifically trained for this threat. Small investment, potentially huge payoff. I can have preliminary designs within 2 weeks, Elena offered. Do it, the Admiral decided, and I want you to oversee the program development personally. As the meeting concluded, officials gathered their materials and filed out, many stopping to shake Elena's hand or offer quiet words of appreciation. 3 weeks ago, they had dismissed her warnings. Now they were implementing her recommendations across multiple agencies. Director Patterson lingered behind. There's something else you should know, Colonel. The President has asked to meet you next week. There's talk of a civilian commendation. Elena blinked in surprise. That's unexpected, is it? Patterson smiled. You potentially saved thousands of lives, prevented massive infrastructure damage, and identified a new threat to national security. All with a 70-year-old airplane and sheer determination. After Patterson left, Jack and Elena gathered their materials in comfortable silence. They'd been working 16-hour days since the incident, analyzing evidence, briefing officials, and designing countermeasures. Not bad for a couple of retirees, Jack commented as they walked out. Elena laughed. Speak for yourself. Apparently I'm back on active duty. About that, Jack said, his tone turning serious. Have you decided if you're going to accept the program director position? It would mean moving to D.C., overseeing the whole operation. Elena hadn't given him an answer yet, though the military had been pressing for her decision. The truth was she was torn. After years of retirement, did she want to dive back into the bureaucracy and politics of military leadership? They walked outside to the Pentagon's central courtyard, finding a quiet bench in the late afternoon sun. I'm still thinking about it, she admitted. Part of me wants to go back to my quiet life on the coast. And the other part? Jack asked. Elena watched a formation of jets streaking across the sky above them. The other part knows I can help protect against threats that most people don't even understand yet. She turned to look at him. What would you do? Jack considered for a moment. I think you already know the answer to that. You've never been one to walk away from a fight, especially one that you're uniquely qualified to win. She smiled, knowing he was right. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane, who had become a close friend through this ordeal. Turn on the news. They're talking about the Atlantic incident again. Elena pulled out her tablet and they watched as a news anchor described what little had been made public about the event. The official story mentioned only a potential threat that was neutralized by quick military action. No mention of a retired colonel in a vintage plane, or how close the country had come to a devastating attack. They'll never tell the whole story, Jack noted. Probably for the best, Elena replied. The last thing we need is copycats trying to build their own versions of the weapon. As the news shifted to other stories, Elena turned off the tablet and gazed across the courtyard, where young officers hurried about their duties. You know what really gets me? She said after a moment. If they had listened in the first place, we could have intercepted those ships before they ever got their weapon operational. That's the military for you, Jack sighed. Always fighting the last war, never quite ready for the next one. Then maybe it's time to change that, Elena decided. She stood up, suddenly energized. Let's go back to my office. I want to revise those aircraft designs before tomorrow's meeting. Jack grinned, recognizing the determination in her voice. So you've made your decision? I think I have, she nodded. If they want me to lead this program, I'll do it on one condition. No more dismissing warnings because they don't fit the expected threat profile. You might have to fight the entire military bureaucracy on that one, Jack warned. Wouldn't be the first time, Elena replied with a wry smile. 2 days later, Elena stood in a massive hangar at Andrews Air Force Base. Before her sat her P-51 Mustang, now fully repaired and gleaming under the lights. Beside it stood 3 newer aircraft, experimental models with simplified electronics and mechanical backups, already being tested as prototypes for her program. Admiral Carson walked up beside her, admiring the planes. Your new squadron is coming together nicely. The Secretary of Defense has approved the full program. That was fast, Elena remarked, surprised by the lack of bureaucratic delay. Nothing motivates the Pentagon like being proven wrong in a way that could have been catastrophic, the Admiral said dryly. Your demonstration flight is scheduled for tomorrow. Congress wants to see these aircraft in action. Elena nodded toward her Mustang. I'll be flying that one. It's earned its place in the program. I wouldn't have it any other way, Carson agreed. We're calling it the Resilient Air Defense Initiative, RAD for short. Cute, Elena commented with a slight smile. The public-facing name anyway, Carson added. Internally, some of the younger officers are calling it Reyes Raiders. Hope you don't mind. Elena laughed, genuinely amused. Not as long as they learn the lesson that matters, and which is? Sometimes the old solutions are still the best ones. She ran her hand along the Mustang's propeller blade. And never ignore a warning just because it comes from an unexpected source. As the Admiral walked away to greet arriving officials, Elena took a moment to appreciate the journey of the past month. From a retired pilot whose concerns were dismissed to the leader of a new military program, all because she refused to stay silent when she saw a threat. She climbed up on the Mustang's wing and looked into the cockpit, remembering the fear and determination she'd felt that morning as she'd flown out to face an unknown enemy. The bullet holes had been patched, the engine tuned, the old plane given new life and purpose, much like Elena herself. Tomorrow she would fly again, this time with official sanction and support. But the feeling would be the same. The satisfaction of knowing that sometimes one person's determination could make all the difference. Jack appeared below, looking up at her with a clipboard in hand. "They're ready for the briefing whenever you are, Colonel." "Coming," she said, patting the plane's fuselage one last time. As she jumped down and walked with Jack toward the waiting officials, Elena felt a deep sense of vindication. Not just personal vindication, though there was certainly satisfaction in that, but the vindication of a principle she'd always believed in. That experience and intuition sometimes saw threats that computers and analysts missed. In a world increasingly dependent on technology, sometimes it took an old plane and a stubborn pilot to show the way forward, and Elena Reyes was ready to lead that charge one flight at a time.